The red laser dots dancing across my chest should have been the first clue that Linda Patterson had finally lost her mind. But standing there in my own backyard at 7 p.m. on a Saturday evening, watching a full SWAT team storm through my gate with assault rifles drawn, all I could think was how badly Linda had miscalculated this time. GETON, THEGROUND, NOW, AANDS, WHARE, WECANSEE, THEM. 23 heavily armed officers surrounded my lakeside patio, where my family was celebrating my daughter's graduation from nursing school. Kids were screaming, adults were hitting the deck, and my 78-year-old mother was clutching her heart like she was about to meet her maker. The tactical team leader was shouting commands when his radio crackled. All units, stand down immediately. Chief Rodriguez is en route. Do not engage. Repeat, do not engage. That's when I started smiling. Because Linda Patterson, HOA president and self-appointed destroyer of neighborhood joy, had just called SWAT on the police chief's cousin. But let me back up 3 months, because this story starts with something as simple as wanting to use my own damn lake. I'd bought the house on Willow Creek Lake 2 years earlier, a beautiful 3-bedroom ranch with 200 feet of private shoreline and a boat dock that had been grandfathered into the property deed since 1987. The lake house was my dream retirement plan, the place where I'd finally relax after 30 years of working double shifts as a paramedic. The Willow Creek Estates HOA had seemed reasonable during the buying process. Standard stuff about lawn maintenance and exterior modifications, nothing that would interfere with lake activities. The previous owner, an elderly gentleman named Frank, assured me that lakeside barbecues and family gatherings were not only allowed, but encouraged. What Frank didn't mention was that Linda Patterson had been elected HOA president 6 months after he'd moved to assisted living, and she'd brought a very different vision to the community. My first real encounter with Linda came on a warm April afternoon when I was out on my dock, testing my new fishing boat with my neighbor Jake Martinez. We were having a beer, discussing the best spots for bass fishing, when I heard the sharp clip of heels on wooden planks behind me. Excuse me, but are you aware that alcohol consumption in common areas violates Section 4.7 of our community covenants? I turned to see a woman in her early 60s, dressed like she was heading to a country club board meeting instead of walking around a lake neighborhood. Perfectly styled blonde hair, designer sunglasses, and a clipboard that she wielded like a weapon. Common areas? I gestured around my private dock. This is my property. Linda's smile had the warmth of a shark sizing up its prey. Actually, Mr. Chen, while you own the dock structure, the water beneath it is considered community waterway, subject to HOA regulations regarding noise, environmental impact, and public safety. Jake snorted with laughter. Linda, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Nobody owns the water. Mr. Martinez, I'd watch your tone if I were you. The Architectural Review Committee has been meaning to discuss that shade addition you made without permits. Jake's face went pale. He'd built a small storage shed the previous summer, and we both knew he hadn't thought to get HOA approval for it. Linda turned back to me, her smile getting sharper. Mr. Chen, I'm sure we can work together to ensure all lakeside activities comply with community standards. After all, we wouldn't want any misunderstandings. That night, I read through the entire HOA covenant document, all 47 pages of mind-numbing legalese. Buried in Section 4.7 was indeed a clause about waterway activities, but it was clearly written to prevent things like loud jet skis or overnight boat parties, not casual fishing and barbecues. But Linda Patterson wasn't interested in the spirit of the law. 2 weeks later, I got my first violation notice, unauthorized watercraft operation in community waters. I'd been kayaking in my own cove for 20 minutes. The fine was $150, with daily penalties until I submitted a recreational watercraft usage application and paid the $300 processing fee. I called the HOA management company, thinking surely this was some kind of mistake. Willow Creek Community Management, this is Sandra. Hey Sandra, this is Michael Chen at 47 Lakeshore Drive. I received a violation notice that doesn't make any sense. Oh, Mr. Chen. Her voice immediately shifted to bureaucratic sympathy. Mrs. Patterson briefed me on your situation. She said you've been resistant to following proper procedures. Resistant? I went kayaking on the lake I live on. Well, the new water safety protocols require advance notification for all watercraft activities. Mrs. Patterson implemented them after the Johnson incident. What Johnson incident? I'm not sure I can discuss other residents' compliance issues. But Mrs. Patterson said, your activities have been generating complaints from concerned neighbors. I hung up feeling like I'd entered an alternate reality where basic property rights had been suspended by HOA decree. But Linda was just getting started. The next violation came a week later, excessive noise during quiet hours. I'd been grilling burgers at 6 p.m. on a Wednesday while listening to classic rock at a volume that barely carried to the water's edge. Then came unauthorized lighting installation because I'd hung string lights on my dock, the same string lights that had been there when I bought the house. Each violation carried escalating fines, and each time I called to dispute them, Sandra would refer me to the established complaint process that required written responses, committee hearings, and fees that seemed designed to drain my bank account rather than resolve anything. But the breaking point came in early June when I decided to host my daughter, Sarah's nursing school graduation party at the house. Nothing fancy, just family and close friends, burgers on the grill, some music, and maybe a few people would take the pontoon boat out for sunset rides on the lake. The same kind of gathering that had been happening at lakeside homes for decades. I even checked the covenant document to make sure I wasn't violating any specific rules. The only restriction was a noise ordinance after 10 p.m. and I planned to wrap up well before then. What I didn't plan for was Linda Patterson's escalating war against my very existence in her neighborhood. The party was set for Saturday, June 15th. I sent out invitations, ordered food, and even hired a small acoustic duo to provide background music, nothing louder than conversation level. Friday afternoon, I got a call from Sandra at the management company. Mr. Chen, Mrs. Patterson wanted me to inform you that large gatherings require advance approval from the social committee, along with parking assessments, noise impact studies, and liability insurance documentation. Sandra, it's a family barbecue. Maybe 20 people total. Mrs. Patterson defines any gathering over 12 people as a major social event requiring full permitting. The application fee is $500, and approval typically takes 4-6 weeks. I looked at the calendar. The party was tomorrow. This is insane. People have been hosting parties at these lake houses for 40 years. I understand your frustration, Mr. Chen, but Mrs. Patterson has been very clear about enforcing community standards equally for all residents. That night, I called my cousin Danny Rodriguez. We'd grown up together in East LA, went through the police academy at the same time. But while I'd become a paramedic, Danny had climbed the ranks to become police chief of our county. Danny, I need some advice about HOA law. This woman is making my life hell over nothing. Mike, I've seen this before. Power-hungry HOA presidents who think they can terrorize homeowners into compliance. What's she hitting you with? I told him about the escalating violations, the impossible permitting requirements, the way Linda seemed personally invested in driving me out of the neighborhood. Sounds like targeted harassment, Danny said. Keep documenting everything. If she pushes too hard, call me. Some of these HOA tyrants need to learn that community covenants don't override basic property rights. Saturday morning arrived with perfect weather, sunny skies, gentle breeze, ideal conditions for a lakeside celebration. I spent the morning setting up tables, arranging flowers, and making sure everything was perfect for Sarah's big day. Sarah had worked her ass off for 4 years, maintaining a 4.0 GP while working nights to pay for school. This party was my way of showing how proud I was of her accomplishment, and I wasn't going to let Linda Patterson's power trip ruin it. The first guests arrived at 2 p.m., my sister Maria and her family, followed by Sarah's boyfriend Tom and his parents. Normal, quiet people who parked properly, walked to the backyard, and started enjoying burgers and conversation on my patio. By 4 p.m., we had maybe 18 people total, exactly what I'd planned. The acoustic duo was playing gentle folk songs, kids were splashing at the water's edge, and grandparents were relaxing in lawn chairs with cold beverages. It was the most wholesome gathering you could imagine. That's when I saw Linda Patterson marching across my lawn like a general inspecting enemy territory. She was dressed in full HOA president, regalia blazer, pearls, clipboard, and the kind of righteous fury that comes from believing you're saving civilization from chaos. Behind her trailed 2 other HOA board members, Bruce Kellner and Patricia Wong, both looking uncomfortable but afraid to challenge Linda's authority. "Mr. Chen," Linda's voice cut across the party like a fire alarm. "This gathering is in direct violation of multiple community standards." The conversation died. 20 sets of eyes turned to watch this middle-aged woman in business attire disrupting a family celebration. "Linda, we discussed this yesterday. This is a small family party, well within 18 vehicles parked on community streets, amplified music without proper permits, unauthorized use of waterways for recreational activities." She gestured dramatically at the pontoon boat tied to my dock. "And that's just what I can document from here." My brother-in-law Carlos, a soft-spoken accountant who'd never raised his voice in his life, stepped forward. "Ma'am, we're just celebrating my niece's graduation. Nobody's causing any trouble." Linda whirled on him like he'd personally insulted her family. "Sir, this is not your property, and you have no standing to speak about community regulations. Mr. Chen, you have exactly 30 minutes to disperse this gathering and restore compliance, or I'll be forced to take emergency action." Sarah, wearing her nursing school graduation dress and looking like she wanted to crawl under a table, tugged on my sleeve. "Dad, maybe we should just move the party inside." That's when something inside me snapped. "No, sweetheart. We're not moving anywhere. This is our home. This is your graduation party, and we're not going to be intimidated by someone who thinks she owns the entire neighborhood." Linda's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Chen, you're making a very serious mistake. The only mistake here is thinking you have any authority over a private family gathering on private property." She turned and marched away, her board members trailing behind like nervous ducklings, and I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. For the next 3 hours, the party continued peacefully. Sarah gave a beautiful speech thanking everyone for their support. We sang happy birthday to my nephew, who'd driven down from Sacramento, and several guests took gentle pontoon rides around the cove to watch the sunset. It was exactly the kind of memory I'd hoped to create, family and friends celebrating life's milestones in a beautiful setting, the way lake communities were supposed to work. But at 7 p.m., just as we were lighting sparklers for the grand finale photos, I heard the unmistakable sound of boots on gravel and tactical radios crackling with urgent chatter. "POL, ICA, EVERYBOD, YDOWN, AANDSWHEREW, ECANSEETHEM. The SWAT team came through my gate like they were raiding a drug cartel, Assault rifles raised, voices shouting commands, red laser sights painting my chest and arms. My 78-year-old mother hit the deck next to the potato salad. My nieces started screaming, and Sarah's boyfriend, Tom, actually wet himself when a tactical officer pressed a rifle barrel to his back. For 30 seconds, it was pure chaos, armed men yelling, family members crying, and me standing there in shock, wondering how a graduation party had turned into a military operation. That's when the lead tactical officer's radio crackled with Danny's voice. "All units, stand down immediately. Chief Rodriguez is en route. Do not engage. Repeat, do not engage." The officer looked confused, but lowered his weapon. "Copy that, Chief." Standing down. "What the hell is going on here?" I demanded. "Sir, we received reports of an armed standoff in progress, threats against law enforcement, and possible domestic terrorism activities." I stared at him. Domestic terrorism? We're having a graduation party. That's when I saw Linda Patterson standing at my property line with a satisfied smile, her phone still in her hand from whatever lies she'd told 911. But her smile faded fast when Danny's unmarked police cruiser pulled into my driveway, emergency lights flashing. Danny Rodriguez stepped out of his car, looking like the kind of police chief who'd built his reputation by not tolerating bullshit. 6'2", solid muscle, and 25 years of dealing with actual criminals had given him an authority that commanded instant respect. He surveyed the scene SW, T officers, standing around my backyard, my terrified family slowly getting up from the ground, and Linda Patterson suddenly looking like she wanted to disappear. "Sergeant Morrison, what's your status?" "Chief, we responded to reports of an armed standoff and possible terrorist activity. Turns out, it's..." He gestured around at the graduation decorations and burger plates. "It's a family barbecue." Danny's jaw tightened as he processed the waste of resources, the trauma inflicted on innocent people, and the abuse of emergency services. "Who called this in?" Linda stepped forward, trying to maintain her authority despite the obvious catastrophe she'd created. "Chief Rodriguez, I'm Linda Patterson, president of the Willow Creek Estates, HOA. Mr. Chen has been hosting illegal gatherings, violating multiple community standards, and when I attempted to enforce compliance, he became verbally aggressive and threatened violence." Danny looked at her with the kind of cold professionalism that made hardened criminals confess just to avoid prolonged eye contact. "Ma'am, are you telling me you called 911 and reported armed threats because you didn't like your neighbor's graduation party?" "I reported a volatile situation that required law enforcement intervention." "Did you see any weapons?" Linda hesitated. "Well, no, but..." "Did Mr. Chen threaten physical violence?" "He was verbally aggressive and..." "Did he threaten physical violence? Yes or no?" "Not specifically, but..." "Ma'am, filing false reports with emergency services is a felony. Misuse of 911 resources carries a $10,000 fine plus restitution costs. And if I determine that you deliberately endangered lives by triggering an unnecessary tactical response." Danny's voice got quieter, which somehow made it more menacing. "Well, let's just say the district attorney takes that very seriously." Linda's face went white. I was acting in the community's best interests. "Mr. Chen has been flagrantly violating." "Mrs. Patterson." Danny's voice cut through her excuses like a blade. "I don't care about your HOA drama. I care about the fact that you just forced me to deploy a 23-man tactical team, 2 helicopters, and emergency medical services to respond to a fake crisis." He gestured around the backyard at my family, many of whom were still shaking from the trauma of having assault rifles pointed at them. "You see that woman over there crying? That's my cousin's 78-year-old mother, who now thinks she's going to have nightmares for the next 6 months because you couldn't handle a disagreement about party permits. Linda tried to speak, but Danny held up his hand. You see that young woman in the graduation dress? She just finished nursing school with a 4.0 GPA, and instead of celebrating the biggest accomplishment of her life, she's wondering if her family is going to be arrested because of your petty HOA vendetta. Danny stepped closer to Linda, and his voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried across the entire yard. Lady, I've been in law enforcement for 25 years. I know the difference between legitimate community concerns and personal vendettas. And what you just pulled here, this is going to cost you everything. But Danny wasn't done with Linda Patterson yet. Sergeant Morrison, I want a full incident report detailing the emergency resources deployed, overtime costs, and operational expenses for this response. Mrs. Patterson will be receiving a bill for the entire amount. Copy that, Chief. I also want Detective Martinez to investigate the 911 call for potential criminal charges. False reporting, misuse of emergency services, and reckless endangerment for starters. Linda's composure finally cracked completely. You can't do this. I was acting as an elected HOA official. I have authority to… Ma'am, you have authority to enforce parking violations and lawn maintenance standards. You do not have authority to weaponize police services against your neighbors because you don't like their parties. Danny turned to address the tactical team. Gentlemen, I apologize for the resource waste. Stand down and return to normal patrol duties. As the SWAT officers packed up their equipment and filtered out of my backyard, Danny walked over to where my family was still recovering from the shock. Mike, I'm sorry about this. Nobody should have to deal with armed officers at their daughter's graduation party. Danny, I can't thank you enough for it. He held up his hand. Family doesn't thank family for doing what's right. But this isn't over. Linda Patterson just committed several felonies, and she's going to answer for every one of them. Danny was right. The aftermath of Linda's fake emergency call was swift and brutal. The first domino fell on Monday morning when Detective Martinez arrested Linda at her home on charges of filing false police reports and misuse of emergency services. The local news picked up the story by noon. HOA, president arrested after fake SWAT call on neighbor's graduation party. The footage was devastating for Linda. Security cameras from across the street had captured the entire SWAT deployment armed officers storming a backyard barbecue while families with small children hit the deck in terror. The optics were so bad that even Linda's supporters on the HOA board started distancing themselves immediately. But the criminal charges were just the beginning. The city's emergency services department calculated the cost of Linda's fake crisis: $47,000 in overtime pay, equipment deployment, helicopter fuel, and administrative processing. Under state law, Linda was personally liable for the entire amount. Her homeowner's insurance refused to cover it, classifying her actions as criminal misconduct outside their policy terms. But my personal favorite consequence came when Danny decided to take a closer look at Linda's history of HOA enforcement actions. Mike, I've been reviewing complaint patterns in your neighborhood, and something doesn't add up. Linda Patterson has filed 17 noise complaints in the past year, but my officers have only substantiated 2 of them. The rest were either unfounded or appeared to be harassment. What does that mean? It means she's been wasting police resources for months with bogus calls, trying to use my department as her personal HOA enforcement arm. We're going to audit every complaint she's filed and potentially charge her with additional false reporting violations. Within a week, Danny's investigation uncovered a pattern of abuse that went far beyond my situation. Linda had been calling police on neighbors for everything from children playing basketball after 7 p.m. to elderly residents walking their dogs too loudly on public sidewalks. Jake Martinez, My neighbor with the shed issue came forward with documentation showing Linda had threatened to call police on him for illegal construction unless he paid the HOA's arbitrary fines. Mrs. Henderson, an 84-year-old widow, had been harassed with noise complaints every time her grandchildren visited, forcing her to cancel family gatherings to avoid police encounters. The Patterson family's reign of terror had been systematic, calculated, and completely illegal. The HOA board emergency meeting was called for the following Thursday, and nearly every homeowner in Willow Creek Estates showed up. The community center was packed with people who'd been terrorized by Linda's abuse of power and were finally ready to fight back. Linda tried to maintain control by calling the meeting to order and insisting on procedural rules, but she was immediately shouted down by residents who'd had enough. "Linda, you called SW a T on a graduation party. You've been harassing families with fake police reports. You cost our community $47,000 in emergency services fees." The vote to remove Linda from the HOA board was unanimous, 127-0. Even her former allies voted against her, desperate to salvage their own reputations from the scandal. Bruce Kellner, who'd been Linda's lapdog for years, actually stood up and publicly apologized for enabling her behavior. "I was wrong to go along with Linda's increasingly aggressive enforcement tactics. We lost sight of what an HOA is supposed to do: maintain property values and build community, not terrorize our neighbors." But the board removal was just the beginning of Linda's consequences. The criminal trial began in August, and it was a prosecutor's dream case. The 911 recordings of Linda's hysterical false reports, the body camera footage of SWAT officers storming a children's graduation party, and the documented pattern of harassment complaints created an unwinnable defense scenario. Linda's attorney tried to argue that she genuinely believed there was a safety threat, but Detective Martinez's investigation had uncovered text messages between Linda and Patricia Wong discussing how to force the chain problem to a resolution through official channels. The jury deliberated for 37 minutes before finding Linda guilty on all charges. Judge Wilson was not gentle during sentencing. "Mrs. Patterson, you abused the trust placed in you as an elected community leader. You weaponized emergency services against innocent families. You traumatized children, terrorized elderly residents, and wasted tens of thousands of taxpayer dollars with your petty personal vendettas." Linda got 18 months in county jail, 5 years probation, and a permanent restraining order preventing her from contacting any Willow Creek residents. But the financial consequences were even worse than the criminal penalties. The $47,000 emergency services bill was just the beginning. My family filed a civil lawsuit for emotional distress, and the other targeted neighbors joined in a class action suit for harassment and civil rights violations. The settlement negotiations revealed that Linda had been skimming money from HOA maintenance funds to pay for her legal war against the neighborhood, turning a community organization into her personal slush fund for attorney fees and enforcement costs. When all the financial smoke cleared, Linda Patterson owed over $300,000 in restitution, legal fees, and civil damages. Her house went into foreclosure by Christmas. But the absolute best part of Linda's downfall happened 3 months after her sentencing, when I was out on my dock enjoying a peaceful evening of fishing. A moving truck pulled up to the Patterson house, and I watched Linda's belongings get loaded into boxes for her move to a studio apartment across town. She looked tired, defeated, and about 20 years older than when she'd first stormed across my lawn with her clipboard and righteous fury. As the movers finished loading, Linda walked down to the water's edge where I was casting my line. "Mr. Chen, I wanted to apologize." I reeled in my bait and looked at this woman who tried to destroy my family over party permits and lake access rights. For what, specifically? For everything. The violations, The harassment? Calling SWAT on your daughter's party. I was wrong, and I'm sorry. I studied her face, looking for the manipulation, the angle, the scheme. But all I saw was genuine remorse from someone whose life had been completely destroyed by her own choices. Linda, do you know why this all happened? She looked confused. Because I went too far with the enforcement? No. This happened because you forgot that we're supposed to be neighbors, community members, people who look out for each other instead of looking for reasons to tear each other down. Linda nodded, tears starting to form in her eyes. Your job as HOA president was to make this neighborhood better for everyone. Instead, you turned it into your personal kingdom where you could terrorize anyone who didn't bow to your authority. I know. I don't know how I became that person. Well, you've got plenty of time to figure it out now. Linda walked away without another word, and I never saw her again. 6 months later, the new HOA board voted to eliminate most of Linda's punitive enforcement policies. The water activity restrictions were removed, the noise ordinances were returned to reasonable levels, and the permit requirements were streamlined to focus on actual community concerns rather than harassment opportunities. Jake Martinez finally got approval for his storage shed, a process that took 15 minutes instead of 6 months. Mrs. Henderson started hosting her grandchildren again, and their laughter on Saturday mornings became one of the neighborhood's favorite sounds. The Willow Creek Estates community became what it was always supposed to be, a place where families could enjoy lakeside living without fear of armed raids over graduation parties. These days, I host regular barbecues on my dock. Not because I'm trying to prove a point, but because that's what lake houses are, for bringing people together, creating memories, celebrating life's milestones in beautiful settings. Last weekend, we had Sarah's engagement party on the patio. About 30 people, music until 9 p.m., and several pontoon boat rides to watch the sunset. The new HOA president, Maria Santos, actually stopped by to congratulate Sarah and Tom on their engagement. Nobody called SWAT. As I was cleaning up after the party, I found one of Linda's old violation notices that had blown under my deck furniture, something about unauthorized string lights or excessive noise. I crumpled it up and tossed it in the trash, remembering how those pieces of paper had once seemed so threatening. Now, they just looked like what they'd always been. The desperate power fantasies of someone who'd forgotten that communities are built on cooperation, not intimidation. Sometimes, I still see Linda around town at the grocery store, the post office, always alone, always looking like she's trying not to be recognized. I don't take any satisfaction in her downfall. I just feel sad that she chose to use her position to tear people down instead of building something better. Because, in the end, that's what this whole story was about. The choice between being the kind of person who builds community and the kind who destroys it. Linda Patterson chose destruction, and it destroyed her in return. But the rest of us chose to build something better in the space she tried to tear down. And on quiet evenings, when I'm out on my dock, watching the sunset paint the water gold, listening to children play in yards around the lake, I'm reminded that sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies. Sometimes the best revenge is simply living well, celebrating life, and proving that community doesn't have to be built on fear. Even if it takes a SWAT team and a police chief cousin to make that point clear.